benchmarking the cost effectiveness of a retrofit. Now, this is something we're going to see of a huge importance. It will be here in the UAE and indeed probably around the region as the transition to a cleaner economy actually escalates, and we're hearing and seeing that that escalation is certainly coming in place. We have a tremendous panel that is in place, I think, to do that, but I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back to World Future Energy Summit our wonderful moderator for this session, and she's a partner with Evershead, so please a very warm welcome for Michelle Davis, and I'm going to hand the podium to you, Michelle. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and hello to everyone here in the audience, and thank you, Masdar and World Future Energy Summit, for inviting us here today. I will introduce you to our very esteemed panelists in a moment. This session is going to focus on energy efficiency, which is often seen as the low-hanging fruit, but it's in many instances the most effective way to solve some of the energy challenges that various countries are experiencing at the moment. And we're very fortunate to have a very experienced panel in this area. We want to save as much time for you to ask questions as well. And so please feel free to make this an interactive session and put your hand up and ask questions, even if I'm asking one, please. So our first panelist is Faisal Ali Rashid, who is the Director of Demand Side Management within the Supreme Council of Energy. Faisal has a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Ohio University. He's also a certified project management professional and has huge experience in dealing in this area, but also within the oil and gas sector, the power and water and generation processes. He's current demand side director in the Supreme Council, and I'm very much looking forward to some of his views on how you create a demand really for energy efficiency in a new market. We then have Frank Waters, who is a director of EU GCC Clean Energy Network. Frank is probably well known to many of you. He's been in the region for a long time and has been working in this sector for over 25 years and has been involved in projects of well over 4.5 billion US dollars. He's involved in small-scale projects, large-scale projects, including the 100 megawatt Shams project here in Abu Dhabi. He was for a number of years Deputy Director General of IRENA and was also a director of the Masdar Clean Energy unit, so has an awful lot of experience in this region. We then have Jens Bergersen, who is the CEO of Rockwool Group. I really liked your phrase, Jens, the era of sustainability as a nice to have is over, which is absolutely right. Jens and his team are committed to integrating sustainability into business and people's lives. Their insulation products typically save between 80 and 1,500 times the carbon emissions emitted during their production. And then we have Stefan Legentil from Watica. Stefan is the founder and CEO of Watica, which provides consultancy and advisory and project management services in this area, energy efficiency and energy demand side management. Originally, Stefan was here in Dubai and he set up and led the Etihad ESCO, which was the official government organisation set up to reduce electricity and water consumption in over 30,000 buildings in Dubai. So hopefully you can see that we have a very esteemed panel and very expert. So I'm going to begin by asking Faisal a question, if that's okay, Faisal, just to set the scene really. If a country is, or a city is looking at commencing this kind of retrofit or energy efficiency program, what should be the starting point for them? Where do they begin in the process?
Yeah, thank you very much. We're looking forward for the discussion. I think we always, not only with the Building Retrofit Initiative, with all the DSM program that we have, we always start with the target. We benchmark ourselves, and then we learn about the possible target that we can set for ourselves. Once we get to the target, we will engage in creating a roadmap, how to reach this target, and then we look at the implementation plan. Do we need to create an institutional setup? Do we need to do capacity building? So for the building, we have already started with the sort of a market creation, then the ESCO, the super ESCO, which is something we have benchmarked with the outside world. So the super ESCO has been created to push the market at the beginning, and at some point, when the market is mature, could be in 5 years or so, maybe the super ESCO will withdraw and then will leave the market. Then also, we know that the roadmap has to start somewhere, so we looked at the governing by example, which is something that we have to start somewhere. So we started with focusing on the public building, government building, and we basically issued a directive by the Supreme Council of Energy to basically mandate all government building to do a walkthrough audit, because you have to also know the potential for the saving, and also for them to reduce the consumption by 2020 to 20%. And Tehad ESCO is basically the supporting body to help these government, whom also, I think this is something new to them. It's not part of their core business to look at the energy efficiency. Yeah. So this is a brief of the starting point.
Okay, and that's so that's great, and you look at the opportunities within government buildings, and you look at the targets that need to be set. And I'm going to ask this question of Frank. How difficult is it to create a policy environment in a jurisdiction where the energy price is, or the cost of energy to the consumer is heavily subsidized? What do you do then?
Yeah, well I think, thanks for that question. I think we have to start with the realization that you have an ESCO model because there is a problem. You know, the premise of an energy services company is based on the fact that there is a viable business proposition that is not being implemented. So there is an energy saving opportunity that is cost effective and would make business sense, but the owner of the building doesn't do it. So, and that's why you know, you have an ESCO model, which is in a way it's a third-party financing mechanism to make something work that makes sense but doesn't happen. So there is a problem, and then you have a solution. And basically, if your starting point is that you don't have a business case, which is the case if you subsidize energy so that there is no business model, then there is not even a solution, because there is not even, you know, a problem that can be addressed. So in a way, I think it's a little bit of a catch-22. And if we're looking at where ESCO models work in this region, then we have to be realistic. It works in Dubai because people pay for electricity and energy in Dubai, and there is a business case. You know, we're all looking forward. I mean, there's been an announcement this week that Saudi is going to increase prices. You know, many countries under fiscal pressures are now reducing subsidies. So I think that will, in the end, open up the opportunity for the ESCOs. But you got to have a business model first, otherwise nothing will happen. Yeah.
And I'd like to ask this question of Stefan and Jens to get their views on what is the best approach. You just set it as a requirement, and we've seen that in certain parts of Europe, in my home country, the UK, for example, where, for example, from next year, it will not be possible for a landlord to lease a building unless that building has achieved a certain degree of energy efficiency. About 3 or 4 years ago, they introduced a rule that if you wanted to sell your property, it had to have an energy performance certificate, so the energy performance was very visible to a buyer. but imposing rules on landlords whereby they cannot rent that property unless it is energy efficient is a very strong incentive. And I'd be interested in both your views in what you think is the right approach. Is it an incentive-based approach? Is it simply a mandatory rule? What do you think works to create an environment where people engage with this?
I think exactly what you say. It's what you describe is a very, very prescriptive and very strong measure in the UK. I didn't know about this, by the way, so I learned this, but this is very, very strong. I think what you need first is to, obviously, as we just heard, the price of electricity and water needs to be at a level that makes sense, because otherwise people will not do it, and even if you mandate it, people will not redo it because they don't really care. But you also need to have a proper legislative framework, and I think that's what in Dubai, the right thing that has been set by the Supreme Council of Energy, by the RSB in Dubai, having set up the right framework, the standard contracts and everything like this. Then there was the step that Faisal just described, that was to mandate the government entities to do audits. It's a first step of pushing it, because then people, when they have the audit in hands and they see, oh, I could save so much, then you start to realize that there is a potential. Going further than this, it's a very tricky thing. I think mandating, making it mandatory, that's a lot of. I think that's tough. But if things do not happen, that may be things that will happen, especially, I would say, with government, because the government can instruct the government to other government entities to do it. It's becoming mandatory, and that's how in Dubai that's how more or less been done. But with the private sector, it's a lot more tricky, and I think we're not there yet. So,
yes. Okay. Yeah. Jens, do you have a view on this?
I think in markets like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, it's very important to start with the underlying physics and understand the total business case. Because I think once that's understood, people see through what needs to be done on the business model, mandated, behavioral economics, etc., to do it. And the fundamentals for retrofit here is incredibly strong. There is a culture to build a building envelope that isn't built to last, and a tradition maybe after 20 to 40 years to tear buildings down and rebuild them. And if you look on a global scale, from the environmental perspective, in Europe, 40% of all energy and CO2 is existing buildings. That's where we live. Globally, it's a third of energy and CO2 in buildings, and more than a third of all waste globally comes from buildings. So just applying existing technology outside the traditional HVAC, thermostats, demand response, etc., to just build a build-to-last shell through retrofit, cut that energy consumption CO2 by at least 50%. 80% is doable, and in this country, almost 70 to 80% is cooling. So you can cut that bill out.
Sorry, just so clear, using you can have an efficiency saving of 70 to 80%.
Yeah, so you can save. So let's move away from efficiency. It's a bit complicated,
yes.
It's a ratio. But if you look at the building, 70 to 80% is to cool it. And by building a build-to-last retrofit with insulation, you can cut that consumption by 50%, up to 80%. So that means you have at least a 50% saving on every building. And what does that do to you? That means you can downgrade all equipment you install. So all HVAC equipment can be down, small equipment, and the productivity of your renewables, solar and wind, you double the productivity of them. They can supply twice as many houses. So I think once you've done that mathematics and the physics, I think you see that you need to work on this thing with the retrofit of the shell, the envelope of the building, and then you figure out the model. And it's a mix between regulation from political level together with what Frank said, the business model. And that's fully doable to do. Some countries, they manage this really well, and absolutely it can be done here.
So Jens, you're saying take a more holistic approach?
I think it's like this. When you talk about benchmarking, don't get into the nitty-gritty KPIs. Look at the overall calculation. And on a global scale, just to give you average global scale, we could cut complete energy demand in the whole world by 20% just by insulating. So it's massive. The maths underlying is there, then we can figure out the model.
Can I ask a question? Because I mean, we're talking about the technical details and the business case. But if you properly insulate a building, the entire comfort, your thermal mass is different. It's just a much better building to use and to live in. What's your experience with that?
Yeah. Now, again, very good comment. The first point is just one factor and calculate, but you're absolutely right. If you insulate a building, that draft you get from the aircon, that is a cold waterfall, that goes away. That cold or hot wall, depending on your climate, you get a bigger house because it's comfortable everywhere. Insulation or a better facade means also that you get a more quiet house in a dense area, and depending on the material, you also get fire safety. So you get all of those factors on top, and we all know it, the ones of us that have renovated the experience, but even the primary physics is enough to drive a model, and then all those effects come on top. I mean, when you take a skyscraper in Abu Dhabi or Dubai, to be able to keep the people there and make artistically beautiful facade that is fireproof and improve the comfort and of the whole building and cut the bill, that's a very attractive thing. So you need to do a few projects, and then people will underwrite all the other effects.
When you say do a few projects, though, and I want to get the views of the other panelists as well on this, I mean, who pays for the retrofit on those pilot projects? Are you suggesting that the building owner, because it will in effect pay for itself, or the people using the building?
Without changing the business model for the ESCO, obviously today they don't get paid for doing that. It's tricky. But I think the starting point to take a governmental building where the value in 10 and 20 and 30 years' time matters, that's a good way to start. So governmental buildings, you see it in Europe, pension fund buildings, they think about how much will this building be worth in my net present value calculation in 30 years' time when I need to sell it in the society we have then, and they think that way. So I think pension funds and governmental building to start with, and then read out the business model along the way.
No, I understand. And Engineer Faisal, you said that you were starting with government buildings because you felt you needed to practice what you were asking others to do. I mean, are there any further plans with similar kinds of bodies, for example, the military, or any other quasi-government building?
Basically, it is addressed to all government in Dubai. And as I said to you, we looked at the other part of the world. So whenever it comes to commercial and residential building, we haven't seen sort of a mandate that been applied on these. It was more sort of voluntarily through awareness, through incentives. So I think fund management also is part of it. But for government, I think it's an opportunity for us also to learn in terms of execution, in terms of market as well, in terms of opening new ESCO, private ESCO. So that is also happening. We have a scheme of certifying these ESCOs. So I can tell you on what's happening on the ground also. We have already projects on the ground, 3,000 building in the pipeline. And we assume by end of this year also more, I think government will enter into contract with the Super ESCO. And hopefully it will spread slowly through the next journey, which is, as you said, the commercial building. I think it's, as the gentleman said also, it's a business model. And for us as government, we don't look at only the consumer, we look at also the supply side. Instead of us talking today about building a new power generation plant, which is something we have to do when there is a growth. And I think the Emirates of Dubai is all about growth, the yearly growth. Either we expand our infrastructure, and then the discussion will focus on that, or we can think of something else which gives you equivalent value, which is targeting building, which basically, in terms of stock, they are huge, and they consume 80% of the power generation. And the industries in the Emirates is very small, maybe represent 10%. So we definitely see a value, we definitely see a return, we definitely see an added value for government, for the end user, for the, I think, the private sectors as well, in terms of opening a green job and creating a green market as well, whether projects, whether services, and so on.
Yeah, okay. And, oh, yes, sorry, Stefan.
I just want to add something to what Faisal said, just to give an idea. I don't know if everybody knows here, but when you look at government of Dubai, that's pretty large in terms of type of buildings. It's not just I would say the administrative buildings. We're talking about Dubai Airport.
Yes.
We're talking about obviously all the government or administrative building. We're talking about the free zones. And there are a lot of free zones. In Etihad, we did the retrofit with Jebel Ali Free Zone. We did the retrofit with the IFC, the financial center. We're talking also about mosques. So there are 1,200 mosques in Dubai. Those will be retrofitted. So when you look at it, the scope is already fairly large. I think where really the challenge is in this whole business is the residential market.
Yes.
That's pretty complex because there you're talking about smaller buildings, a lot of smaller buildings, and then you're addressing a lot of multiple owners, and then it gets a lot more complex. In Etihad, we did a project with 2,000 villas, retrofitting last year. We retrofitted 2,000 villas. We choose to do a very simple. We didn't go for the full
was there
isolation.
One landlord? Sorry to interrupt you, Stefan. Was there one landlord, or were they
multiple? No. It's different landlords, but one managing entity.
Okay.
It was with Mohammed bin Rashid Housing Establishment. But every time you're talking to different people, they want to do it, they don't want to do it, etc., etc. And then we choose to do a very simple retrofit. It was a lighting retrofit because we didn't want to make it complex. But we saw that the logistics and, going to each villa, ringing the bell, we explaining what we're going to do, and getting the buy-in from everybody was extremely complex and time-consuming.
Was that a one-off payment, though, for that retrofit, or was it an
No,
ESCO?
and we did it for free. It was, for the villa owners, it was free. Yeah. So we didn't want to have this barrier of... So, and even like this was a test for Etihad to see how can we handle the retrofit market in residential.
Yes.
But that's where the big challenge is, I think.
Before I come to you, I just want to pick up on something that Stefan said, which is that, and I'm talking from experience within the European market, and I want to get Frank's view on this. It's the commercial building and residential buildings that are going to present the challenges, not least because with these lovely government buildings, you've got a lovely party to contract with, which is the government, which is a pretty safe bet in terms of being paid. The credibility, the financial credibility and bankability of the residential or commercial counterparty is often a big issue on projects like this, because the banks need to see a revenue stream over a certain period of years, which means that third party has to stay in place and be good for that period. I mean, Frank, how do you think all of that translates to the UAE, and how do we? Is there anything that we can be doing peculiar to this region, or do we just have to, get our heads around it in the same way that we have in other countries?
Well, I think some of the fundamental issues that we have here are the same all over the world, and that the fact that in many cases, if not in most cases, the owner of the building is not the tenant. So if you improve the building, then the company or the person that has the benefits of the lower energy is actually the user of the building, and that's the same here as in Europe. Now, that's in a way challenging, because your contractual party is who? Is that the owner? Most likely not. So you're sharing your benefits with a user of the building, and then the people that put the money to work need to be comfortable that for the period that the financing has to be paid back, that contractual relationship still exists. I think there the difference between Europe and possibly the US and the Gulf region is that people here are a little bit less patient, in the sense that they would like to see a quicker payback, and in that sense, you got to look at measurements that are really quick in their turnaround. So that's why there is a focus on the air conditioning, on the lights, which which have pretty attractive and quick returns. And I think it's going to be a little bit more challenging when you're looking at facades and insulation and windows and the more complex, the building envelope. Another point which I think would be interesting to look at, and there is some examples going on right now also in Dubai under the net metering scheme for solar, is also there. You can apply the ESCO model, which it's slightly different, because there the system works that somebody installs a PV system on somebody else's roof. You own that as a third party, and then so you have a contractual relationship with the building owner in terms of using their structure, but then there is another contractual relationship with the electricity consumer, because that's the one that can apply for the net metering benefits.
Yes.
So there's a power purchase agreement with the user of the building, and then the financing needs to be working, with two contractual partners in mind. And it's interesting to see that it actually works. But the question is, can we roll it out? Is it scalable? How big can it be? And again, it works in Dubai because people pay for electricity. That's why the net metering works. And the question is, how quick will the prices go up in other Emirates and countries for it to work there as well? But it's an interesting proposition.
Thank you, Frank. We have a question here. Are there any other questions? Okay, would you like to ask your question? Could you please say who you are?
Sure.
I'm not sure if there's a microphone. You may just have to stand up and speak loudly.
My name is Jeff Robinson. I work with a company called Oricon. We're heavily involved in the retrofit market in Australia. And I thought I would maybe just ask a question, but also a couple of suggestions of things that worked very well in the Australian market. The first thing is, within the commercial building sector, we're finding rapid improvement in the quality of existing buildings because of a number of measures that have been put in place over a period of time. The first thing is having a common measurement scheme that everyone ties up to. We use a thing called Neighbours. It basically benchmarks the carbon performance of office buildings, and it doesn't matter where they are, it doesn't matter what the climate is, it doesn't matter what the fuel source is, there's a common basis, and it means you can compare one building against another. And using that, the government then brought in mandatory disclosure of existing buildings. So I can jump on a website now and I can tell you the energy performance of pretty much all the top commercial buildings in anything over 2,000 square meters in Australia. And that's been so successful, they're now dropping that to 1,000 per square meter.
And what that has done is, if you have to report every single year on your energy performance, the last thing you want to be telling your CEO is, actually, you know, we're using more energy this year than last year. We're going backwards. It just doesn't happen. It's not career advancing. So what has happened is that just through reporting, people are getting better and better and better. Now, the issue of the split incentives, we've looked at that as well. And what we've got is an innovative financing mechanism whereby the local authority will collect, a bank lends money to a building owner to go and make improvements, say energy efficiency improvements, and the money is actually collected through the local rates. So there's a guarantee that they will get the money back, and that obligation stays with the building whether it's sold or not. So it tackles that issue of the split incentive.
Like the UK's Green Deal?
100%, or like the US's PACE mechanisms. And I think the other thing is, for the domestic scale projects, I think one other thing on the commercial side is, one of the biggest problems, no disrespect to ESCOs, is that they go in and they strip out the low-hanging fruit. They go and do power upgrades, they go and do, air conditioning, and they do lighting at the same time. What we've found over a period of time is if you strip out the low-hanging fruit, it's so hard to pay for the other things that come later on. So what we try to do is actually a blended mix, and we work on the basis is, if you have to go in to make changes to the air conditioning system or the lighting system, what are the other things you could do at the same time in terms of sealing or in terms of upgrade of controls? And by doing that blended mix, you can make much, much bigger moves over the long term than if you strip out the low-hanging fruit. And at the domestic sector, I think the way to get that to happen is to involve community organizations and to come in who will explain what the opportunities are and to get them involved and start little industries to go and do those retrofits. It's not best done by massive big companies and things like that. It's actually a great opportunity to build business, to go back in and do little retrofits and upgrades at a small scale and so on. Now, my question is, for the things that I've spoken about, what would prevent you in the UAE implementing some of the things I've suggested?
I think, Engineer Faisal, that is your question. I'm going to have to limit it to an answer from Engineer Faisal because we are out of time, sadly.
Yeah, as I said, we have started this only 2 years ago, and there are things already on the ground happening. And I think the point that mentioned by the gentleman, we know that the private owner tend to know that the energy efficiency is the beneficial, they get the benefit, there is a good payback period. But some of them, they have done also outside the ESCO model, which is through supply and install. So that will happen, but it will go slowly. When we have studied that ESCO model, make the market grow, and then to make it go a bit faster to reach our target, which is 30,000 buildings by 2030. And the energy intensity that has been mentioned, I think we have also done sort of a pilot project to combine the consumption data with the building data to basically to address the kilowatt hour per square meter, where you can compare building to building, apple to apple, hotel to hotel, with similar sizes, with similar, I think, climate also condition. I think this is where the awareness will come to these end user in terms of they can compare themselves and they can see how efficient they are. Last point also, we know that with the private sector, I think there is some enabler that could come, which is the funding. And by this quarter, or end of this quarter, we should be able to sort of define a funding pool to support the commercial building and some of the other DSM program, which is not only building, lighting and other things.
Okay, Stefan, I know you just wanted to add something quickly.
Yeah.
Fine.
Just on two of your points, because I've been looking at this. So on PACE or these kind of mechanisms here, you have to see that we are in a non-tax country. people don't pay any tax. So it's very difficult to put a scheme like this because you have no basis for this. So now this is coming slowly. So in the future, this may be feasible, but right now, difficult. The other thing I wanted to comment on is the why are we, it's not that we're looking at low-hanging fruits, but why some of the retrofits are limited to what you described, simple things, etc. Here there is also, I'm coming from Europe, where I was doing retrofits where we were committing with the owner on contracts for 15 years, 20 years. Here, more than 5 years, people are saying, no, I don't want to commit for more than 5 years. Why? I don't know what my buildings will be in 5 years, and maybe I'm going to rebuild, destroy them, do something else. So it's very difficult to look at the long term, maybe a bit with the government, but then you have the other issue that is the financing part of it, where here, landing at more than 6-7 years is becoming a big issue. So it's at least on retrofit type of projects. It's not true on bigger projects, but for retrofit, it's very difficult to find financing for long term.
Thank you, and I'm afraid we are being asked to wrap up. So I think in summary, this region presents a huge opportunity for energy efficiency, adopting the right model, the right policies, and overcoming some of the challenges to integrate this more into the private sector remains, and it'll be interesting to see how all of this pans out. But if we were to crystal ball gaze to 5 to 10 years' time, this will certainly be happening, including here. So please will you join me in thanking this very esteemed and expert panel, and thank you for your time. Thank you, gentlemen.